right. Silence.
Awesome.
Mr. Bean. Silence. On you.
All right. Are we good to go? All right. Hey guys, how's it going? Pretty good. So my name's Ishana Izzy, and I'm hosting today's G Talk. This is my co-host Dean.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about branching narratives, non-linear games, that sort of stuff. It's my first time presenting, so good to see some familiar and some new faces. Hope the semester's been going fine for everyone. So before we get started, does anyone here have any general idea about what makes a non-linear game, a branching story? All right, Lucas.
For me, one of the big ones is that when I'm playing the game, my friend might experience a different sort of route. So let's say I killed a certain NPC, they might affect something down the line that my friend might not be able to experience, or maybe I'll experience something else because I killed them. Then he might, let's say his brother comes and tries to attack me for revenge.
Yes, that's a very good example. In general, when we talk about non-linear games or branching narratives, there is a core story to it that most players do experience. But then in between that the core story or the critical path, there's a lot of different branches that can be split into. For example, as Lucas said, you may choose to kill an NPC and someone else might not. It might be more dialogue based, like it is in Detroit Become Human, which we will be touching on in a bit. It might be more just based on what the player is showing, like in the Stanley Parable. We'll also be touching on Undertale, or Dean will be. But yeah, so let's officially get started with the talk. Dean, do you want to also just talk about a bit about your experience with non-linear games?
Oh yeah. Okay. So main thing is why are can I stand up?
Sure.
Can I stand up? Oh hell yeah. All right. Why are non-linear games cool and interesting to players? Well, the main appeal to them is that they give the player agency, and we all love agency. We love having control over our actions, right? Yeah, I'm sure we do. So yeah, they make games interesting compared to standard story games like, let's say, The Last of Us, where in The Last of Us you have a set story. This will always happen at this point, and this is how the story is going to end, which is great. But in this kind of stories, you have so much control, and there's different types of agencies where you might be able to completely change the outcome of a story and everything within it, or you could maybe, depending on your playthrough and how you play through the game, you could befriend different characters and have the same type of story and the same type of outcome, but the way you make that journey to that outcome is slightly different every time.
Right, yeah. Thank you, Dean. So for the general layout of the talk, what we'll do is we'll start off with a few game examples, because in my opinion, the best way to understand any sort of genre or how a game works is by taking some good games and dissecting them. Like I said, we'll talk a bit about Detroit Become Human and the Stanley Parable. And then Dean will talk extensively about Undertale, because I actually haven't played Undertale. I really need to get to it. But by show of hands, who here has played Detroit Become Human? Right, we got a few folks. How about the Stanley Parable? Okay, we got a few other folks. And Undertale? Okay, that's a better number. So I guess we'll start off with Detroit Become Human. So for people who are a bit unfamiliar with the game, I won't talk a lot about the game's actual story, but the general quick overview is you're playing as a few androids who have become, or you can choose to become deviants. And the entire game doesn't have like a single story that you have to follow, because there's a lot of different endings. I'll try not to spoil much. But in one ending, you could be like the robot Jesus and everyone's really peaceful. It's all quiet and it's like a quote unquote happy ending. Or on the opposite side of the spectrum, you can go out and just genocide and kill all the humans you can. I really like Detroit Become Human because it handles dialogues in a very amazing manner. Plus, it also does a very ballsy move that we'll get to in a little bit. In terms of dialogues, so Detroit Become Human, you have three main characters that you follow, and you can change the stories of them based on what you choose. So you could have Connor, who's supposed to be a detective. You can either really like the partner you're working with, Hank, and you can really bond with Hank, or you could be just a complete machine and let Hank come close to dying in multiple spots, or just not care about him. Both of these have their pros and their cons. Both of these, even in the beginning, if you think, oh, it's just small problems or small choices, they aren't. In the end, it all comes back. And the ballsy thing I was talking about is one of the androids, Kara. What you can do is in the beginning few chapters of Kara, you can just get her killed, and like 35 to 40% of the game just ceases to exist. Which, from the developer's point of view, it's just an extreme move. It's extremely cool. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, you have this developers who probably spend like 7-8 months working on that section of the story, and just because of a few decisions you made, that entire section of the story is just gone. Which has its pros, has its cons. We'll get into it in a bit as well. Dean, do you want to talk about Detroit as well a bit?
Oh yeah, I love to. Adding on to my previous, I'm standing up again. Adding on to my previous point about having agency in the game, the reason that makes Detroit Become Human so cool and so unique is because, like, well, for one thing, like as you mentioned, you have complete control over what you get to do. You can be Robo Jesus, you can be a literal saint, or you can commit genocide. You know, it's all up to what you want to do. And what is really cool is how real your actions feel. So typically in this game, if you make a decision, that decision is monumental. Like, for example, you can do something bad, something really bad. And instead of like, you get like a little bit of dialogue going like, wow, you're a bad person. You can get an actual consequence where someone you deeply care about is gone. Because of your shitty action, you completely destroyed that person's life. And that's all your fault. And I think that's really cool because it shows that just like real life, your actions have genuine consequences, which those genuine consequences will make you feel terrible about. I mean, probably, maybe, depending on your moral standpoint, you'll probably feel terrible about causing the death of real people, but who knows? But yeah, that also adds into the fact that you also have multiple perspectives of how you take this course of actions, because there's 3 main characters. I don't remember the names exactly. I know Connor is one of them.
We got Connor, Marcus, and Kara.
Thank you. And you can all experience, they're all completely different characters, and you can experience arousing different experiences with them because they're all different people. And there's genuine emotional stakes, and your characters have flaws. There's genuine emotional stakes, and the characters you play as display the same flaws, as a regular human would have, despite being robots. But I mean, that is pretty much the actual name of the game. That's the point of the game. But something I do find interesting, and one of my favorite parts is, along with the agency, is how, as you touched upon it, how it's a very bold move to cut out 40% of something you worked so hard on because you made a bad decision. Touching back on you made a bad decision, you get severe consequences. That consequence being you lose 40% of the game. Half the game that the developers worked so hard on is gone because you did something bad. That's amazing. That's an awesome thing. But that's also a real life consequence, which you could tie into other things in terms of real life. But the cool main appeal, I would like to say, is how much the game ties in exactly to real life, and how you may have certain experiences in real life that, you do something bad will happen to you, etc. And I think that's a great and amazing appeal to this game.
Absolutely. Before we move on, this is a question for those who haven't played or don't know the answer, because it's something I'm interested in seeing what general people think. If you don't know and you had to guess, how many endings would you say Detroit Become Human has? Keep in mind, it's a AAA game. It has a lot of budget. It looks extremely beautiful. The entire story is extremely beautiful as well. Keeping everything in mind, how many endings do you think the game has? Yeah.
10.
Okay. I saw a hand over there. 15. Anyone else? Yeah. 40. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone over 40? 40 going once, going twice? Yep.
Well, is there like a set, maybe set that point of that happens at the end, or
So that is actually a very good question, because in Detroit, without saying how many endings there are, you can take some endings and bunch them into one, because the overarching scene is the same, where the end result is the same. But even in those endings, there are multiple sub endings, wherein based on the decisions you made and what characters you still have and your relationship with those characters, even those same endings will be different. Sometimes by just a small margin. Other times, even the same ending might have two completely different sub-endings. So I don't have the exact number on mind right now, but I'm just talking about not insanely major differences, but just major different endings. So the highest number we have right now is 40. 12, fair enough. If I recall correctly, the game has, like, in terms of different endings, it has like 98 or 99 different endings. Correct me if I'm wrong. Does someone know exactly? I'm pretty sure it's 98. I remember reading that number, which the first time when I read it, to me, it was just completely bonkers, because how do you create a game where everything has every choice has a meaning, it all comes together at the end, and you still have 98 different endings or somewhere in that ballpark, which is something we'll be touching on, is the challenges of creating nonlinear games or branching paths. But before we do that, let's move on to our second example, the Stanley Parable. So I saw a few people here have played the Stanley Parable. It's personally one of my favorite games, both the Stanley Parable and the Ultra Deluxe version, and especially because Stanley Parable is an indie game. It was made by, like, the original team was made by just two guys, I believe. Maybe they had some help in terms of publishing or models, but the general team wasn't too big. And the revamped version, Ultra Deluxe, I think it has a slightly bigger team, but again, it's nowhere compared to like AA or AAA. But in the Stanley Parable, for those of you who haven't played, the general idea of the game is pretty simple. You know, in games, how there's always a narrator, and you do basically what the narrator tells you. Stanley decided to go through the left door. You hear the narrator, you're like, oh, okay, the narrator knows what I'm doing. But this game takes the idea of a narrator and flips it on its head, wherein the narrator is something you can interact with to an insane degree. It could be decisions such as the narrator tells you to go through the left door, but you decide on going to the right door, the narrator will react to that. If you decide on staying in the same room for 5 minutes, the narrator will. There is an ending called the broom closet ending, where you just stay in that room for quite a bit, and the narrator's just like, "Are you dead? And if you are dead, could someone please take this guy's body away and get a different player to come in so they can get out of this room?" And there's so many funny and the story of Stanley Parable is something like we can have a completely different talk on, because it's so well written. But the main appeal for the Stanley Parable for me is how it allows you to do so many different things without having Stanley utter a single line of dialogue. Everything that changes in the game, all the branches aren't based on choices you make in terms of like immediate choices or dialogue choices with other characters. It's all between you and the narrator and your dynamic. You could choose to do exactly what the narrator says, and you'll have one ending and the narrator will really like you. Or you could have a different ending where you just, whatever the narrator said, you did the exact opposite. And by the end, the narrator will hate you. In some endings, the narrator will have a mental breakdown. In other endings, there's time travel. But it's for someone who hasn't played it, I don't want to spoil the game. It's an extremely amazing game. And if you're even a little bit into narrative or branching games, I highly, highly suggest playing either the original or the Ultra Deluxe. And now for the third game, which most people here have played, not me, sadly, Undertale. So for Undertale, I'll let Dean do all the talking because,
Oh
go
boy,
ahead.
yap session incoming. All right. So first of all, how many people here have played Undertale? That's it? Okay, I'm surprised. Oh, I'm surprised, honestly. Okay, do you guys know what the main appeal of Undertale is? Someone who hasn't played, what do you think the main appeal of Undertale is?
It's
Story. What about its story?
well, it's just the how likable the characters are and how they deal tribute for your choices.
Okay, that's pretty good. Anyone else? What's up,
I
Rand?
literally thought people are obsessed with Undertale just because of like Sans as a character. Literally, I just thought people thought like Sans.
20% of the fan base for sure.
Sans as a character is an interesting one. I'm gonna go more deep into that one because I can kind of see that. Okay, so so the main idea for nonlinear games is the branches, they have replayability. Most of the time, at least. Sometimes the story is the same, but I touched upon that earlier with the story still ends up the same. You just play through the game a little differently. Undertale has a little bit of this aspect where technically there is a neutral ending where the ending is slightly varied, and the cool thing about when I mentioned about agency is the neutral endings. There's technically an infinite amount, and it's all dependent on the actions you take. It's a lot of implications, and frankly, the neutral endings are interesting, but they're also kind of boring. That's not necessarily a bad thing because it is the neutral ending. You don't really expect much to happen. You just play the game standardly. The main cup of tea is probably the genocide and the true pacifist ending. And the main one that's my cup of tea is the genocide ending. Not saying it because it's genocide, but because I think it's interesting. I'm just clarifying. What's up?
Is Undertale a kids game or is it like
No, I mean, not really.
In the same way, like people consider like Five Nights at Freddy's a kids game, it's like it's not designed for kids.
Oh, okay.
It's just the community that's kind of built up.
It's-
it has like
okay.
connotation around it.
okay? No, I thought it was like
we were all kids. So
yeah, because he's mentioned genocide.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
okay, but yeah, it has genocide, but it's not like super violent, and
Okay.
it's technically not. The word genocide is technically not mentioned. I think. I'm pretty sure it's just implied that you just kill everyone. And so, anyways, so getting on to, I'll start with the true pacifist. So, the compelling part about true pacifist is, well, you befriend everyone. You meet I think I'd say 5 to 8 of these compelling, awesome characters. They're very charismatic. They all fit to embody a certain archetype rather than to challenge it. They choose to embody this certain type of person that you'd expect from a video game character, right? You have like your stereotypical tall, dumb, brute jock, right? You know, he's big, he's stupid, he's goofy, he's lovable. You have your small little shy nerd, I guess, you know? You have their fat, lazy pig, who, that's Sans. I'm going to touch more on him more specifically later. Like I said, I'll touch more into it later. And, you know, you have all these cool character archetypes, and you get to experience them throughout the whole game. And you get to start off with the kind of it all depends on your moral ambiguity, really. But let's say you have a golden soul, and you decide to go through the whole game on your first playthrough. You don't harm anyone. You spare everyone. You're like, wow, I love these characters. You get a cool, interesting ending with compelling characters, compelling villains, and a very up for interpretation storyline, which I think is an amazing part of Undertale that really sells the game. So that interpreted storyline ties into the other routes. So, but like in True Pacifist, you kind of you have your standard it's very surface level. You know, you have your good guys, your bad guys. You fight the bad guys, and the day is saved. You know, everyone escapes to the surface, and it's great. Going into a more in-depth level, the part that I think is the most interesting is talking about the genocide run. So the genocide run is only accessible from if you decide to kill every single living being ever in the underground. You have to go out of your way, and you have to make sure every single being in every area is dead. And you got to kill. And the more you kill, you got a kill counter as you proceed with the game. You got a 5 left, 4 left, and you got to keep running around, going out of your way, because this will take so much longer than a standard route. Because a standard route you could just run through. This one you have to choose to keep running around, getting your random encounters like Pokemon. You're basically hunting for Pokemon at that point. You're going killing everyone for fun. Very honorable. Yeah, just like Power Worlds. So as you keep going, so this is more past a moral ambiguity part, and it's more just I want to kill everyone. As you keep going, you notice that everything is different. The music is a lot darker. There's no energy in the music, and then the music ends up getting replaced with ambience. And I think that's an awesome touch because it shows there's no more people. The more you go on playing the game, there's less and less sounds. The game becomes more quiet. There's really nothing going on anymore because I killed everybody. So as you go on, a lot of the interactions change from comparing it to a true pacifist route. So, for example, you can go. What's a great example? A great example is Undyne. If you played Undyne and you fight her in the true pacifist, if you don't know, Undyne is like this warrior fish lady. She's very against you. If you're sparing everyone, she's very intent on killing you. She does not like you. She does not like humans. She is very racist. You can't blame her though. Like realistically, I'm pretty sure humans are pretty bad people.
Or just imply racist. Go on.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna say it's racist because it's funny. So, okay. So, how in Undertale the humans have this power called determination, which you probably all know is a standard motivator. I'm determined to get this thing done. In the Undertale world, determination is a superpower, and it allows you to reach feats never before. Like monsters can't do that. If monsters try to have determination, they melt, they die. And that's a pretty interesting plot point. That's a very compelling plot point because it shows some vast differences between humans and monsters. Monsters can do this things, and it's reflected in their souls. As you can see when you kill them, you can get a glimpse of their souls. I believe monster souls are usually plain white, and they're upside down compared to human souls, if I remember correctly, which reflects that they're very lacking in a lot of things that humans have, like certain emotions. But I think it's really cool. Touching back on Undyne, in true pacifist, you try to fight her, you just have a standard, typical boss fight. She tries to kill you, dodge her attacks, you be nice to her, and then you spare her. I mean, granted, it takes a little bit, but you gotta run away from her. You gotta go to her house, set her house on fire, cook a nice meal. Then you could become friends. But in Genocide, it's more of like at that point of the game, you're really far gone. You enter this area, you find a little kid, and the little kid's like, "Hey, what's up, dude? It's a fellow kid. Nice to meet you." And then you try to murder him. You just try to murder him, and then Undyne's like, "Oh shoot, I gotta protect this kid." And then at that point, you're so overpowered. You one-shot Undyne. She doesn't put up a fight. She's dead. She's gone. But then, the cool thing is, touching back where I talked about determination, she uses the power of determination, which she only gets from being so determined to defeat a monster such as grand as yourself. You chose to become this monster. And that determination allows her to become like this phase 2, like this isn't even my final form kind of thing. And it's great. It's a more challenging fight. In the end, you obviously do have to kill her because you're killing everyone. That's part of the game. You do kill her, and she dies, but she has that extra characteristic that's only accessible through your action of being a genocidal maniac. And that's, like I said, that's one of the main appeals of these branching narrative games. You only open these doors to these certain aspects of these characters that you would never know unless you do this specific thing. And the main thing I want to touch upon is Sans, because Sans is a very, very interesting case. But you look excited. Do you want? Okay. Funny. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's the first thing. So your impression of Ness? Oh, someone said Ness. Someone said Ness. We got MatPat in here. Hold on. How do I? Oh, should I click the wrong button?
That's all right.
How do I open the chat?
Yep. There we go.
Oh, Jonathan J knows the stuff. All right. So the first thing, Sans is officially Ness. I'm just saying that's canon because I said so.
Okay.
No. I'm MatPat. I'm not telling you. I'm MatPat. Okay. So yeah, that's what's my favorite example of this opening up doors to aspects of characters you will never find out unless you do the specific action is Sans. Because in true pacifist or neutral, Sans isn't much of a character. Realistically, you kind of talk to him. He takes you on a date. He's like, yeah. He's there. He's like, hey, I made a promise to someone. I said I won't kill you. So I'm just gonna be watching. That's what he does. He kind of just watches. He's just there. He doesn't have that much to do. He's still a funny character. Like I said, he embodies a fat, lazy, lovable, fat guy archetype because he's fat. In case I mentioned, he's fat. Fat. He's a lazy slob. That's this guy. He likes ketchup. He likes downing ketchup. And that's just Sans, of course, but that's just a theory. A game theory. Yeah. Anyways, but the cool thing is, so let's go. It's a neutral. In neutral, Sans is the same character, but at the end of the game, before you finish the game, he will always judge you for your actions, and he will judge you depending on, because in neutral you attain neutral by not necessarily killing everybody, but not necessarily sparing everyone. So if you kill a of certain bosses because let's say it's your first playthrough, you don't know. You just assume I got to kill the bosses because, I mean, that makes sense. That's how most video games work. You do that, Sans will judge you for that. And let's say you go as far as to killing his brother, Papyrus, which is like I said, embodied the archetype of the tall, lovable, dummy jock. He will judge you heavily, and he'll be really mad at you, but he won't do anything. Like I said, he's lazy and he's a sloth. He'll say like, "Wow, you suck," but that's kind of it. And then in Genocide, after you've killed absolutely everybody, Sans is one of 3 people left in the entire world, and everyone knows the notorious Sans fight. Everyone knows Sans' theme, right? Like, is there a single person who doesn't know Megalovania? Probably not, right? It's very iconic. And the cool thing is that's a very small part of Sans. Like, that doesn't come out until you specifically kill every single person in that world. And this is a part of Sans that is this is a very small part of Sans that is not seen in any other part. It's not implied that Sans has great power. I mean, whether he really has great power is also yeah, it's kind of debatable because he's really just throwing bones at you. But I think it's a very interesting aspect of his character because he still judges you regardless of what you do. But in this case, not only does he judge you, he is determined to kick your ass. And then as you go through the fight, as you play through the game, and this is also brought up in the fight, your save file. A save file is a standard part of any video game, a single-player video game. Your save file is just what you use to save your progress, so you don't load up the game and all your progress is gone. In Undertale, your save file is another superpower you have, and it's basically you're basically God. That save file makes you above everyone else in this world because you have full control over their fates. The save file allows you to choose any points you want to stop the world entirely. Or if you want to reset the world, everyone's actions gets reset to 0. You can do that. That's completely up to you. No one is aware of this. Not a single person, except for Sans. Sans is the only person aware of this, and that leads into his. How I said he embodied he's a fat, lazy, pessimistic slob, and then you realize you tie that into, oh wait, he's a very pessimistic and he's a lazy person because he realizes every single thing that he's ever done can be reset at a push of a button. Any form of improvement, any form of progress he can ever make in his entire life can be erased if the player felt like it, just like that. So he just doesn't try. He explains that to you during the fight. You don't get that aspect of his character unless you're fighting him and you make it like midway into his fight. He'll tell you that there's no point. What's the point of even trying if everything can be erased? I think that's almost exactly what he said. And he makes it abundantly clear that that's the reason he doesn't try, because he will never tell anyone else, because what's the point? That can also be erased. So I think that ties into an amazing example of an aspect of Sans' character, which can only be attained from doing the certain action, that action being the genocide one. And tying into that, is there anything else I have to say about it?
We might want to move into challenges.
Challenges? I got a bit more to yap about. Can I finish?
You've got 15 minutes left.
Okay, I'll make it 5. Okay. Okay, last 2 things. So applying the same thing to. So I said there was 3 characters that are left in the world at this point in time. So in True Pacifist, and you get because in True Pacifist the order goes, you don't fight Sans, you skip him, you go to Asgore, and you got to fight Asgore. He's the big king of the underground. He's the big furry boss guy with a cool scythe. In Genocide, he is deathly afraid of you. He knows what you did. He knows you've killed every single other person. He knows he's probably the last person left alive. So instead of challenging you to a fight for your soul, because that's his initial goal, he bargains with you. He says, hey, you want to sit down and have a cup of tea? No, you just kill him. There's no fight. He doesn't put up a fight. You just kill him. He's dead. Well, technically you don't kill him, but the interesting part is the main game's villain, Flowey, which if you play true pacifist, like I said, he's the bad guy. He's the big baddie you got to beat at the end of the run. You save the day, all yada yada. So Flowey actually inside kills Asgore for you, and at the end of True Pacifist, not at the end of Genocide, Flowey goes from being a bad guy who taunts you to whining, begging, and crying for his life, to the point where he kills Asgore for you. Says, see, I never betrayed you. I was on your side the whole time. And starts crying and whining because he knows the inevitable is coming. As a result, instead of putting up any fight whatsoever, like I said, starts crying as you slowly cut him into a million pieces, continues crying until he's become absolutely nothing. It's kind of sad, honestly, but he's the bad guy. He's always been the bad guy. But it's an interesting, like I said, an interesting aspect of the character that will never ever come out unless you take the specific path, which Undertale has plenty of them, but there's the main three. And I think that's an amazing use of branching, where you can reveal these aspects of the character's personality by having this specific action happen in them, which can only be attained by the agency that you have in the game, the control you have in the game to make this world like this because of your actions. I think that's an absolutely fascinating and amazing way to showcase. And I think Undertale is one of, if not the best example of this type of narrative writing. Enough yapping.
All right. So yeah, that was Undertale. And in interest of time, what I'll do is, you've been hearing us for quite a bit. Now I want to hear from the audience for a little bit. You've heard what branching narratives are. You've heard of a few games. You've heard us talk about what those games have in them, how they operate with branches. According to you, based on what you've either experienced in the past or learned so far, what do you think are some challenges developers, either indie or AAA, would face while working on a non-branching game or branching game? I'll start from this side.
Properly figuring out which ending the player should get.
Yeah, that's a very good one. We have another one. Another hand. Yeah.
I think like a lot of developers can fall into the pitfall of, well, they have like a few main different branching paths they see that they want the player to take, and then there are a few that are really undeveloped. They're just kind of options that either or, doesn't matter what you pick, it goes the same way. Telltale, rest in peace. A lot of their games fell into this sort of thing where the choices don't matter too much. You always get funneled towards the same ending. I'll be honest, I haven't played every single Telltale game, but the only one I know where the reactions I feel really mattered, at least for the last chapter, was the first Walking Dead. Because depending on who you friend and who's still alive by the end, it completely changes the last chapter. But the ending, even still now, the ending's always the same. Even down to the last major choice in the game. I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't played it. Even the last major choice, while it's very emotional and impactful, doesn't change the outcome of the game. Even though the Telltale kind of built itself on being the branching path game developers, it doesn't really feel like the paths are specifically different or really mean too much, because it all kind of gets funneled back to the same place.
Yeah, which is something I'll get to Lucas in a bit, which is something I do want to touch upon. I had it in my notes as well. The whole reason I've never really played any Telltale game, and even if I have, I've only played first 25-30%, is because I know that in the end there aren't many endings, and whatever you're choosing isn't going to significantly impact the story. It's just in the moment choices. Sorry, what's the name? Sorry? Will. So like Will said, when in the ending, regardless of what you choose to do, the ending is still the same, which is something you never, ever, ever want to do in a game, especially in a game where you're giving player choices. You never want to negate the player's agency. You can't be for example, the player's reading a diary, and you can't give the player an option. Should I continue reading this person's diary, or should I give it back to them? And just for example, let's say I choose that, oh no, I want to give this diary back to the person. I'll play as a morally good route. But after that, if the game immediately goes, oh, actually, no, it's too interesting, I'm going to keep it. What's the point of giving me an option if you're still going to do what you wanted to do anyways? It not only infuriates the player in most cases, but it also completely messes up with the pacing of the game, because if you give an option where an option isn't required, it starts to decrease the meaning of even the choices that actually have meaning. So that's something that you always have to keep in mind. But Lucas, you also had a point?
Yeah, one of the challenges that, when I'm conceptualizing these branching things is, at a certain point, you're going to run out of time in development if you're building out all these paths. And how do you keep things really cohesive for players or for your developers really to handle and sort of muddle through.
Yeah.
If you've got 10 branches off the beginning, and each of those branch into 3, and each of those branches, maybe a couple of them clip off, but a couple of them will keep going out. And so you hit this really big, kind of like almost spider web of choices.
So that's a very huge problem that a lot of people face, and everyone here knows Megan, right? Everyone has a class with Megan. So for me, Megan is creative writing, and I was talking to them about this talk as well, and they were kind enough to give us some suggestions that they've used themselves that we can use going forward in our branching games. One of the first ones they talked about, like Lucas said, a lot of creators or developers, when making branching games, at the beginning we're like, oh, this choice is going to go into this path goes into this one, and each path has 3 subpaths, and then they all go out, and by the end, if you get to the end, you have like 500 different endings. It's an exponential increase. You won't realize when you've gone from 20 to 200. So what you want to make use of extensively is something called foldouts, where, here, do you want to pass me the marker real quick? Oh, thank you. Where, so for anyone who doesn't know how foldouts work, is let's say there's two ways to go about in the branching narrative, right? Let's say this is where, and the marker doesn't work. Let's see if we've got another one. If we don't, that's fine as well. So the way, let's see if you have one.
Damn, we're really short on markers.
Thank you. All right, let's see this one. So I'm going to check if there's some that's started. That's usually always a good bet. There you go. All right. So let's see, this is where our story starts, right? For someone who doesn't make use of foldouts, let's say in the beginning, we have 2 different options, right? 2 different branches. And let's say this branch, you have 3 different options. And then this branch has 2 options. This has 3 further options. And let's just say here your play dies. This one has 2 more options, and this one has 4 options. And as you can see, as we go down this graph, even let's just give every single branch 2 more branches. So let's say this has 2 branches, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. For anyone who's worked with graph theory or math or just has common sense, you'll see that if we get to the bottom of the board, by the time we get there, there's probably going to be like 50 different endings. So the reason you want to make use of foldouts is, let's say you start here, you give your player 2 different options, and then over here, the player has 2 and 3 options here. What he could do is maybe these 2 options fold back into the same story point, and maybe these 3 options fold back into the same story point. And then from here, you could have a few more options. Maybe some of these start off branches of their own, and some of these meet back like this. And maybe some of these clamp off, the character dies something. And then there's more that you can have which fold back to a similar point. You don't want to use foldbacks too often, because let's say every single decision, let's just say every single decision folded back into something, then what's the point of having choices? If every choice, regardless of what you do, is going to take you to the same ending, like I said about in Telltale, what's the point? So you want to make use of foldouts, but not too extensively, because what foldouts enable you to do is still give player different options that feel meaningful without having to create 500 different endings. Another tip Megan gave us was making use of variables to change the game state. Because instead of changing the story revolving around every single decision, you could just use some variables, some artistic choices as well. For example, in the beginning, maybe you're working on a small visual novel. One of the choices could be changing the clothes of the character, right? So that's just a small change, which is based on just in the beginning, you just set a variable to what type of character you want, what type of clothes you want. But it can go a lot further into the story as well. Because let's say you give the player 3 options. You give them an option of dressing very business-like, dressing very emo, and just not dressing at all. So as you can probably imagine, the third option would probably lead to jail. Public nudity isn't the best thing to do. The formal option, the biggest thing the player will notice at the beginning is the clothes they wear. But as the player goes through the game, maybe because they're in a formal mode, the meetings they attend, it has a better result of being in their favor. Or maybe you have some game variables such as the amount of food you've eaten, where if the player doesn't eat food in the beginning, it might just be like, oh, whatever, it's fine. And we're handling that using just one variable. But if they continue doing that, maybe by the end, the player looks very emancipated and is very like starving. So we can make use of a lot of different variables where we can change the story itself without having to go to the narrator and ask the narrator to make like 50 different endings for that one choice. And finally, now that we've talked about these two ways, does anyone have a question? Anything so far? Everyone good? Awesome. And let me just, okay, we have got 5 minutes left, so I'll finish up quick. The final point that Megan talked about was, as Will was talking about, when developing games like these, we don't know what paths the player is going to take. Let's just use the foldouts. Actually, I'll use this for the first example. Let's say the first decision, the player goes there. Let's say Dean and I are playing. Over here, I decide to go make this choice. Then I go here. Then I go down here. So within the first, let's say 30 minutes of the game, I am down here. And let's say in Dean's case, within the first 30 minutes, he's over here. So someone might have worked extremely hard on this route, but no one's seen that. And someone else might have just not worked on this path at all, but that's the path Dean is on. So in game design, we have this concept of a critical path. Does anyone here know what a critical path is? Especially someone who's in narrative design? Right, Lucas?
The critical path boils down to essentially key points in your narrative, or I guess in sort of game design as a whole, the design, that every player is going to experience. So in a story-based game, you might have the player walks into their bedroom and they get dressed, and then they get a bunch of different choices, but then it all folds back to them leaving their house to go to school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can, eat dinner, or you can get dressed,
Exactly.
or you can do whatever you want. But it all culminates back to you going to school, and then those changes can affect things when you're at school, or maybe you did everything, so if you're on a different path, maybe you didn't do them, so you go different.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Or another way, let's take the game Minecraft as an example. It's going to be a bad example, but it's going to be a simple example. Let's say the endings of Minecraft are maybe some person just decides fighting the Wither is an end, and maybe another ending is actually getting to the end and fighting the Ender Dragon. Maybe another person's ending is just having an insanely huge potato farm. Go Island, I guess. But those are different endings the player can get. But what's the critical path most Minecraft players will face? Yeah. So in this case, let's say Ender Dragon, Wither, all of these guys, they're different endings. So whenever a player starts playing Minecraft in the first 30 minutes, what are some things every player is going to do? Punch word. Anyone else? Craft. Will?
Start building a base.
Start building a base. So in Minecraft, if the different endings were the different biomes or the different creatures you can kill, the critical path would be creating a base, creating a chest, creating some armor. That's something every single player will experience. Similarly, in a game where you have a lot of different branches, you definitely still want a critical path that regardless of the choices, everyone still experiences. So let me grab another marker. Let's just say for now, this also matches into this. So over here, the player has multiple different options. So the player does feel that their options have some meaning, right? Because in the moment, especially since it's the beginning, they know their decisions won't be too significant because they're just getting into the game, but they still feel there is significance. However, all these options over here, they all end up at this point. So over here, this point to this is what we'll call a critical path, because the beginning is something every single player will be experiencing, and then this story beat is something every player will be experiencing. So in general, the major story beats of your story, like it could be a character's death, it could be having to choose between going between two different routes. It could be anything, but if it's something important that you are putting love into, putting attention into, it is highly suggested that you make it a part of the critical path and have the players actually experience it. Since we're running short on time, I will suggest a very, very good GDC talk that I did write notes on, and I have a few things I could talk about. But since we don't have enough time, I highly suggest watching Cassie Phillips' All Choice, No Consequences GDC talk if you guys are into branching narratives, because she talks a lot about what makes those choices impactful, and she talks about the 4 facets of stories or branching stories, which in order of importance are story, branches, dialogue, and choices. Yeah.
Can you put that link somewhere in the Discord?
Yeah, I'll send that link in the group. Okay, yeah. So I'll send the link out as well. But okay, I'll just start wrapping up now. This is. You have something?
Oh, I was gonna say, I want to ask. I have a question for everybody actually relating to the talk. If because I was actually looking at some of the talks. So, in terms of when every single one of you would play a narrative game, there are two. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's 2 options where it's you have complete agency over the like. Let's say you have this big world, and this world will shift in outcomes depending on the choices you make, or the world stays exactly the same essentially, but your choices make your interactions with these players slightly different. Like let's say uh, GTA, GTA 5 specifically, where you have different interactions with the characters, and certain characters will have different outcomes, but overall the story is the same from beginning to end regardless of who lives and dies. Do you guys find it more satisfying playing a game like GTA or Undertale in terms of having agency over the world, where the world is completely different based on your actions, or where the story is the same but your interactions and your friends would be different? What's up, Will?
I think it depends on what you want out of your game, right? Like, I did mention Undertale, or not Undertale, Telltale games, and like I might have been a bit like harsh on them because what they advertise, like some people might not be looking for. But that being said, like it also the way they structure their games allows you to get like attached to all of the characters that they do, right? Like sure the characters might like ultimately have like similar or the same outcomes, or they might not. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is it's structured more like a regular game with like choices, whereas Undertale changes like completely depending on what you do. So it depends on what you're looking for, right? Like if you want like a more like narratively like solid game, then like the less
Impactful?
well, okay, no, because I'm arguing against Undertale being negatively or being narratively strong. Very much it just boils down to which one out of your game, right?
There's
like
no-
some people get kind of overwhelmed by that much choice. Like some people will look at like or the amount of hoops you have to jump through in Undertale to like get to like the genocide ending or even the pacifist ending. Or some people want to like just sit down and experience like a story that they like feel like they can have input on, but like they don't need to do like necessarily as much to like jump through as many hoops to like change the world into an outcome they want.
Okay, there's
That
no
makes sense.
objective answer, but which one do you think is more satisfying?
More sad.
Do you think having more control over the world you inhabit is a more satisfying conclusion? Or just changing who your friends are would be a more satisfying conclusion, Ryan? Yeah,
Okay.
you're Ryan.
So yeah, you're looking at him. I wasn't sure if like.
Oh, I can't see that far.
And so I think what the devs had intended to be the end, like the ending. I feel like that would be best because it's specifically designed to be that way. Because let's say X game has a sequel, it's gonna go off of that like first like a base ending, like the standard ending. I feel like I prefer that, but that's more for like a narrative game. Like I just finished Guardians of the Galaxy not that long ago, and that's a very, very linear game. Yes, you have like certain options here and there, but all it like at the very end you'll have like one ending. If it's something that I'm more like playing just to, like have like a nice story to just chill through, I don't have to sweat my balls off to get past any like enemies or anything. Then I'm perfectly fine with like a set ending. However, if something's more like gameplay focused and less story focused, I feel like whatever I do should have control. So it's basically like a either or. Like I'm fine with either. I don't really prefer either. It just depends on what I'm playing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if anyone in chat also has any input, I'd love to hear it.
While we're waiting on the chat, since I'm sure everyone over here has something to get to,
All right.
we'll start wrapping up quickly. Before we end the talk, does anyone have any final thoughts from the audience? Any questions? Any general thoughts? Yep.
I think it's very hard for much different paths because that feels like what's the point? I haven't played a ton of Undertale, but I have played and in both games, like probably more like means to be the player. player and control the character itself. I'm really excited to see what they do with the whole thing with Chris fighting with his heart. Both games like explore what it means to control that. There's like a clear message saying to get across with all games.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, it's different. They're and the purpose at the same time.
Yeah, that's a very solid point. Everyone should consider when if they're going into making a branching game, which sorry, what's the name again? Victor. Gotcha. So yeah, like Victor said, it's something that we all should keep in mind. What message is it that we're trying to give to the player? Is there a meaning to the story, or is it just for the sake of, oh, hey, here you go, here's 50 different options, 100 different endings, go have fun? So the second one isn't bad by itself either, but both routes have their pros and cons. But usually you want to consider at the beginning of the game what you're trying to tell through the game. And if there is something you want, then it might be better, such as to go the route of a game such as Deltarune or Undertale. There we go. But yeah, thank you so much, guys, for showing up. And we had more to talk about. Unfortunately, we couldn't. But the next time you guys are here, the next time we have a GG talk, we'll have a lot of more good stuff. Yeah, thank you for showing up. And good night, guys. Thank you. You're gonna turn off the recording?
All right, thank you guys for coming.
I will turn off the recording.
One more piece of information for you all. The Game Sound Club is going to be in the Tag Lab from 6:30 to 7:30, and they're going to be doing a session on the Cakewalk DAW, which is essentially like a music